said, every time we walk in, hopefully you can notice a little bit, we're getting a little closer and closer. Actually, Terry came in, and pretty much the flooring's down in the fellowship hall now. So, we get to the worship service stuff. I think we should be ready to go for kind of have I won't say, what's the word I'm trying to look for? Anyway, have a meal in the fellowship hall next Sunday. We'll talk about that a little more once everybody gets in. I'm excited about that.
We're gonna have a party. Have a party.
Yes.
Well, like I said, it's kind of, it's not the official opening, but it's, we got to make sure that, the food tastes good in there. So we'll
Well,
give.
talking about that, I ordered 6, well, they're in. I've got 6 round tables, and then I should have, I know for a fact, 24 chairs, and maybe even, more than that. All of them didn't get shipped, but they're supposed to be in this week, so we should have tables and chairs. We just won't have a refrigerator and all that. So,
We'll be doing that.
so we just talked about it last night, just catering, like barbecue chicken fingers, baked beans and all that, and then everybody just bring dessert.
Or side.
Something that they have to be put in the refrigerator.
Yeah. All right, and like I said,
Well, we're gonna get the sides and everything.
we'll,
But you know those, meals, service that we had put up at the sandwiches? We had all those back then, so I carried some on and some other people carried some home. I put them in the freezer and I ate some the other day.
Are they still good?
No, yeah, they were delicious. I love it.
I do too.
Oh,
I
is
can
it?
eat for a meal. We had lots of baked beans left from
oh, yeah.
Jim Nevis.
Yeah, I put what I brought home in the freezer and I ate some on the other day. I
I bet.
don't waste anything.
Yeah. We'll get there. Like I said, and again, in worship service, and we get everybody else in on that. Excited about that. Again, we're getting the list is growing shorter and shorter, so that's always good. So, all right, so let's we're gonna get in today. Again, don't I still have more of these. If you remember, if you've got something, one of these topics here, plan on ordering books. Hopefully, the second, not a week, but maybe next Sunday, get them in, hand them out. That way, because I know you want to. I understand you want to be able to prepare and for the Sunday school and stuff. So we're kind of just bouncing around here, just some different topics, and we'll kind of get into today's. If you look right here, the title of today's lesson, it's called Rejoicing in Recovery. And what I do is just get around, just start looking at different topics and things like that, and find something that, like I said, just feels like it kind of just affects me to the point, hey, I think that would be good, something good to share. And I think this, as we go through, if you're familiar with the story of Ezra 3, I think we're going to see some things where we can say we kind of know how these people feel as we go through. And so it was kind of one of those, I was like, well, that's kind of ironic here, because I feel like I said, we're, where we are and what we've been through the last couple of years. It's one of these, I just kind of wish maybe had been able to teach this on front end, but I think we'll get it. But I want to start out, like I said, it's rejoicing in recovery, and I don't know how many of you, without, you don't have to show, how many of you have an iPhone right now? Or an iPad, or iPod, or any type of your phone, somewhere, or maybe you have a family member that probably has an iPhone, right? Or iWatch, or Apple Watch, whatever it's called. Got one of those too. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is, Apple, would you classify them as a successful corporation?
Very.
Yeah, gotcha. So a little bit of a story right here. People like this. Steve Jobs or Steve Jobs? It's Steve Jobs, didn't I say that? Okay. So he and there's I don't know, I can't remember which streaming service there is, but there is there's a movie kind of about the story of Steve Jobs, and kind of gets some personal. Again, this is totally secular example, so I'll say that. But in April of 1976, him and a man by the name of Steve Wozniak founded Apple in his garage. Yeah, they just had a vision, what they wanted. 1976, they launched their first computer, the Apple I. And then in 1977, I say this one because I can still remember, the Apple II in 1977 launched at a cost of basically $1,300. And that was in 1977. Now, of course, with the beauty of Google and stuff, I did $1,300 today. That was basically the equivalent of $7,000 for personal computers, what that would have been back in those days. But Steve Jobs had a vision, the way he wanted things to be done. He wanted everything, it was more than just functionality. He was into the aesthetics and all that. So I remember I say this, especially with the Apple. Anyone here remember the Apple IIe? The green screen and all that. Remember that was the kind of first computers we came through. We had when I was in high school and stuff. I can still remember, like I said, just that green hue of that screen. We thought it was really neat. And it's, if you've ever played Oregon Trail on Apple IIe, then you understand how far graphics have come since then. But anyway, so the company goes, it kind of keeps going, and basically they go public in, I think, I'm trying to look at it right here, it's like 1978, 1979, or somewhere around in there, in the early 80s. And then they start having some internal power struggles in the mid 80s. And Steve Jobs leaves the company. They kind of flounder. And by 1997, so in 1997, you could have bought a share of Apple stock for 13 cents. The company had lost over $700 million in a physical year. So the stock was tanking. It was worth, like I said, you could have bought stock for 13 cents a share in 1997. It'd be one of those. I kind of wish I was more in the stock market. So, being the math person I am, if you would have took $100, and invested it in shares of Apple in 1997, you would have got around 700 and something shares of stock. It would be worth over $500,000 because the stock right now is I think it got up to, let's see. Well, let me continue with the story here. So it continues on 1997. So Steve Jobs comes back in 1998. I can still remember the commercials. The iMac personal computer. It's got the big colorful monitors and all that. I can still see them when they first. They would usually launch stuff on Super Bowl weekend. 2001, they launched the iPod, which sells, which carried music and things like that. 2003, the iTunes Store sells 1 million songs in its first week. And then they continue on right there. The 2007, where what really changed the company, that's when the first iPhone came out. And since then, from there, the Apple Watch in 2015. And at that point, I'm trying to find September 2012. If you'd made that 15 years prior, if you'd made that $100 investment in Apple, it'd be worth about $500,000. So you see a company right there on the verge of destruction, and it kind of came back. I just found out interesting, thought I'd share just to kind of set the tone. That's kind of what we're looking at here. Is the company, that company was on the brink, but it hung in there and it made a dramatic turnaround. And that's kind of what, and again, the only thing, money, economics, very secular example, but I'm just using that for the principle of what we see here with the Israelites and Ezra. So just setting the background right here, what's going on, so we get into what has happened here. So let me just go ahead and read the first two first two verses here. It says, and when in the 7th month, this is Ezra chapter 3. And when the 7th month was come, the children of Israel were in the cities. The people gathered themselves together as one man to Jerusalem. Then stood up Jeshua, the son of Jozadak, and the brethren of the priest, and Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and his brethren, and builded the altar of the God of Israel to offer burnt offerings thereon, as it is written in the law of Moses, the man of God. So, and again, I apologize because I know I butchered those names. So what's happened right here at this point? The Israelites have been in exile to Babylon, and they are now being allowed to return. I had notes on that written down. I guess I forgot those. But so that's kind of what we got going on right here. So they have returned. You know, same thing. They were in peril. They were in exile. In other words, they were in captivity. Things were looking bleak, and now they were being allowed to return to their native lands, to go home. So we see that, and what we're going to see is we want to see what the attitude was, you know, as they return, because you can imagine probably over the many years. I think it was over 50. I'm not sure the amount of exile and stuff. Again, all those notes. Like I said, I just showed my age here, messed up. But they've been exiled for a long time. They've been conquered. So here they are. They're coming home, and we see we're in the 7th month, and we see right here what's in this chapter. What's the first thing they decide they need to do? What was the first thing? So they get in, and what do they say? Well,
They offered, did a burnt offering.
yeah, they wanted to build an altar so they can, why, that was important. Why would that be important? Why not? Hey, let's just wait and we'll just hold off on everything, and let's just rebuild the entire temple. Let's rebuild everything, then we'll get back to it.
I think it's important if you want God's blessings.
Kind of get back.
You can get to Him.
Get back on track, yeah. Now, and that's the whole thing. It was like, hey, we need, we got to rebuild the temple. We've got to do all that. But their first thing was, hey, we got to get back to following what the law tells us to do most. And and here's the thing. I'm going to kind of use this kind of the story of us as well. If you think about it. Think about if we made the decision, well, we just won't have church again until we get the building redone. Now again, it took the process they're talking about was over decades too. We're just talking a couple of years. But what's the first thing? If I remember right, we were in the community center that following Sunday, getting back to worship. And I think the more I think about that, this, it kind of makes me, like I said, understand we were right there. So here's what we got. It says the story setting is in the 7th month. Now this is on what is the religious calendar, and the 7th month we're talking late September or early October. So Jews had a civic calendar and a religious calendar. And the reference here is the 7th month of the religious calendar, as it's referred to, and that is that 7th month is referred to as Tishri. I think that's how you say that. It's a sacred time. So, like I said, this down there, I got it. If you want to jot some stuff in, it was a sacred time. It was kind of a lot of major festivals were held during this month. You had the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles, just to name 3 of them that would occur during this month. So it was a pretty important month. So as we look at it right there, we see unity, and the key phrase I want you to look at in verse 1 right there, it says, they gathered themselves together as one man to Jerusalem. And that as one man is not, it's kind of referring to not only just as a people, but also a spiritual community. So it's a spiritual and community coming together right there. And then finally, as we look at it, the leaders right here that are mentioned, Jeshua the high priest, and if we look at, and again, Zerubbabel, I guess if anybody else wants to try to make an attempt at that pronunciation, feel free, because I'm all ears. But what you have right here is the high priest and Zerubbabel. He was kind of the governor from the Davidic line. And they led together. So you see a symbolization here of the religious and civil leadership working together. And, if you look at that, I guess, and again, just drawing parallels. The city, like I said, maybe not, but, hey, the city and some of the county governments have helped us out during this process as well, have they not? So you see, it was just everybody working together and kind of led this process. So, by the time the event described has happened, they've returned, and here's the story I went into it. So, by the time the event we're describing here, those who had returned from exile had already dispersed to live in the ancestral villages. This is found in the previous chapter of Ezra. And there were some that wanted to live in Jerusalem itself. They actually had a situation where 1 in every 10 individuals that wanted to inhabit that city, I think they were selected by lots, some of the research I found. As I said, there were observances, some of the festivals that we discussed, and as we said, we see that it was coming together in one man, like I said, as a spiritual and communal solidarity right there. So the thing is the rebuilding included the altar of God of Israel, and they wanted to do it, in its traditional place in the temple courtyard, even though the temple was in ruins. So if you remember, the temple was, temple was really, like I said, it was completely wiped out. So the function of the altar was to sacrifice burnt offerings, and like I said, it was kind of showing that they were going to get back following the law like they were directed to do in some of the other earlier passages of the Old Testament. So we can see there, we get to verse 3, it says, "And they set the altar upon its bases, for fear was upon them because the people of those countries, and they offered burnt offerings thereon to the Lord, even burnt offerings morning and evening." So the first thing, upon its basis right there is basically, that's what tells them that they have decided they're going to build the altar on the original temple site, where it was built before by Solomon. So from there, as we look at it, we see, and that's kind of what I kind of already jumped at, but what does the rebuilding of the altar before the temple suggest about their priorities? That's like Marie said, hey, they're getting back to business. We're getting back to God. We want blessings from God. We want God to have His hand on this. So, as we said, in verse 3, the fact that the altar was constructed on the temple's foundation reveals that the reconstruction occurred on the footprint of the one that was destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon in 586 BC. So there's some of the background I was wanting to find. The rebuilt altar thus became the fixed point around which the rest of the rebuilding work could proceed. The duration and the time required to rebuild the altar is uncertain. And we see here again, as we look at it, there's something else right there. They set the altar upon its basis, for fear was upon them because of the people of those countries. So it's kind of, as we look right there, what do you think why would they be in fear? They've been allowed, they've been in exile and been allowed to return home.
Well, back then they fought all the time.
Yeah, they just fussed, didn't they? Can't get along.
They fight, yeah.
So yeah, there's always, and again, I think also if you probably went through that, you're going to be a little skittish of everybody that's not wasn't an Israelite around you, was you? So I think, was it in Nehemiah where they was having to build, as they were building right there, they was having to, like I said, I could imagine building a brick wall with one hand. But, that shows that, but nevertheless right here again, but it says, for fear was upon them because of the people of those countries. So perhaps because of that fear, maybe that motivated them, hey, we got to get this done. Who knows how fast, like I said, it's not, an exact time. It says if you go on, if you want to follow up after this lesson, the next chapter, Ezra chapter 4, actions, it kind of tells us some of those actions of those enemies. And the nature of the threat's not evident. Some people have suggested it was the actual physical threat. Hey, we're gonna conquer you. Some people thought it might have been a spiritual threat, as they were making the altar contact with unholy people. But as I said, it's not specific at that point. And but despite the fear, they carried on. And with the altar being rebuilt, we see now that according in verse 3, it says that they offered burnt offerings thereunto the Lord, even burnt offerings morning and evening. And with it rebuilt, the priest reestablished the twice daily sacrifices on behalf of all people, as commanded in Exodus 29, 38 through 46, and Numbers 28. It is also permitted burnt offerings designed to inaugurate worship. So you can see there with the fear, so how did they respond to the fear? They
Did it anyway.
They did anyway. They just put trust in God, didn't they? And I think that's, and it could be, and it's probably been, during the time after what we went through, there's probably people we had fear. What are we going to do? Are we going to be, a lot of things that, as I said, and again, maybe I'm the only one, but as I read through this, I see a lot of, I'm like, yeah, I kind of know what they feel right there. I feel, feeling a lot of, so what I'm seeing here is, like we have, is just keep putting our trust in God, and now, after reading this, after studying this, I'm really emboldened about what the future we have here as we can continue to finish up with our project. So continuing on right there, let's go to verses 4 through 6 now, and it says they kept also the feast of the tabernacles as it is written, and offered the daily burnt offerings by number, according to the custom, as the duty every day required. And afterward offered the continual burnt offering, both of the new moons, and of all the set feasts of the Lord that were consecrated. And every one of them willingly offered a freewill offering unto the Lord. From the first day of the 7th month began they to offer burnt offerings unto the Lord, but the foundation of the temple of the Lord was not yet laid. So, so right there, I think, I listed it down there underneath, but the key insight right there, they didn't want them, they wasn't waiting for perfect conditions to begin true worship. It just starts where you are. And so the feast, we had the Feast of the Tabernacles. That celebrates God's provision in the wilderness, an appropriate festival, you think, to resume after returning from exile. And then you had the daily burnt offerings, and that was, again, a sign that they were returning to Levitical law-based worship, even without a completed temple. Again, I think that, like I said, just for me anyway, it just screams at me that, like I said, we've been doing some good things. And we just need to continue to do so. So from there, so we got that. And so as we continue on, just kind of looking at some of the feasts right there. The Feast of the Tabernacles is one of the 3 annual pilgrimages to Jerusalem, but they thought, even though everybody was there, there's some speculation in some of the commentaries that wasn't the true reason why everybody got together. They'd been exiled. the altar's been rebuilt, and now as it says, that's kind of what has brought back everybody together. It just happened to coincide during the time of the festival. And it is just looking at it right there. In verse 4, it says, as it is written, witnesses the concern for the rooting practice firmly of the law of Moses, of getting back to that. The reality of the reason for the Babylonian exile, given its reason, it's understandable that it was very important during this post-exile period to get back to their Levitical law-based worship. And this leads us to conclude that the reason that the people assembled together as one, as Jerusalem, might have been for the festival, but if we take a look at it, it says they kept also. So so right there, that could lead us to conclude that the people assembled. It maybe indicate that the celebration of the festival of Tabernacle, it wasn't the primary purpose of the gathering, and it's just the broader context of being able to get together and get back to doing and resuming the burnt offerings for the main reason. Does that kind of make sense? Again, I know I'm kind of dominating today. This is more of a history lesson, but hopefully, like I said, just seeing the parallels of kind of what we've gone through. And again, there's a difference when you're in exile and under captivity. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, there are some, we understand why it's more of the rebuilding of the temple is kind of what I'm looking to here. And, so we see right there, verse 5 talks about how we're seeing the reintroduction of all the functions of the altar as an established sacrificial system being fully reinstated. And, so the rebuilding of the altar allowed the Judeans to restart the prescribed worship of God. And, and again, since the destruction, basically Ezra chapter, the first 6 verses of Ezra chapter 3, it shows a renewed commitment to worship and obedience to God right there. So we kind of see, it kind of sets the scene right there of kind of the hows and whys. Why did they want to get back? Why did they want to go ahead and restart building the altar? So now we're going to skip to verses 10 through 13 and finish up this chapter. And now we're going to see kind of the good part. What's in store for us? And I think everybody has, as we come into, since Easter, since we've been coming in here, we see the progress each week. Hopefully you see your joy building. So we look at verses 10 and 11. And when the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, they set the priests in their apparel with trumpets, and the Levites and the son of Asaph with the cymbals, to praise the Lord after the ordinance of David king of Israel. And they sang together by chorus and praising and giving thanks unto the Lord, because he is good, for his mercy endureth forever towards Israel. And all the people shouted with a great shout. And they praised the Lord because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. And again, like I said, it took, I think, I remember reading somewhere, like when they started, it took them like a year and a half or something like that to get the foundation laid. So as the foundation is laid, the people worship, we see what was their response. They respond, the people worship with musical instruments, responsive singing. Like I said, here it is. It took a year and a half. And it talks about when you usually hear trumpets being referred to, especially in the Old Testament, what type of trumpets do you usually think of? What are they made out of?
Probably horns.
Horn. The ram horns, right? These trumpets were not. The trumpets mentioned here are not made of the kind from a ram's horn. The word being translated for trumpets, as used here, is the same one that refers to those made from silver in Numbers 10, 1 through 10. So, you think about a silver trumpet back in those days, so that's pretty, they're holding nothing back. They're bringing out the good china, right? So they're bringing out the good stuff. And right there. So, by here, the David's ordinance, the broader aim was not to discard what? it's like, yeah, hey, we had a rough past. We were in exile, but we're not going to discard the positive aspects of Judah's past, but we're going to renew them. And, I think, we see it in verse 11, we see another renewed connection with its past as the musicians sing of God's love and enduring goodness. And these lyrics go back to King David centuries earlier. And I think I've read somewhere it is, they were kind of reciting one of the Psalms right there. So, with that, I think that's important also. I think that's a good attitude for us. When that day occurred, there was a lot of memories, and a lot of things that in that building right there. And I think the attitude we see right here from, let's don't discard the positive acts of the past, but let's just renew them. Let's renew them right here with this building. So, verses 12 and 13, we'll get it, and I'll actually be closing here. I'm kind of short-winded today, I guess. Verses 12 and 13, but many of the priests and Levites and chief of the fathers, who were ancient men, that had seen the first house when the foundation of this house was laid before their eyes, wept with a loud voice, and many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not discern the noise of the shout of joy from the noise of weeping of the people. For the people shouted with a loud shout, and the noise was heard far off. So as we are looking at that, as the temple's being completed, as it's being completed right here, you see the older priest and the older Levites are kind of weeping a little bit, and the younger ones are shouting for joy right there. And so the sound of, and it said that the sound of the shouts of joy and the weeping, it kind of was so loud that it was just, you couldn't tell one for the other, basically. And what does that show right there? Why, I guess the question I have right here, why do you think the older priests and Levites wept while the others shouted for joy?
Well, they were remembering
Yeah.
the older ones.
Yeah, you think they were really, it was truly sadness, or just
No, I don't think it was sad. I think
Yeah.
it was just so happy.
happy, yeah.
And remembering the old.
Yeah, it's like, hey, we're happy. Like I said, I don't want to say it's sad. Like I said, it's a joy, but it's a joy of remembrance of what they had before.
Yeah.
It wasn't just we're in this new building, so that type of deal. And, and obviously, like I said, they were, and the first, when I read this, the first person I thought about was Jane Frida's, Free and Just Mom, I know how much this bit. I remember a statement, I remember one time that Tabitha made a statement about how much that building has meant to you, the previous building and stuff. And I thought about that. That really reached out. It's just like, I'm sure, maybe a different, like I said, Frida and Jeff, y'all grew up in this church, and I'm sure probably you can, relate to what we're talking about right here. Because how many Sunday school classes with Grace and Jen? Yeah. So, and the younger maybe even the younger generations, don't. But again, the sound of weeping. The individuals remembered Solomon's temple weep, possibly out of grief or longing. Like I said, I kind of agree with that. I don't think it was just out of grief or longing, and the younger generations were celebrating a new beginning. And I think that just shows how, and like I said, they just show here that restoration is a complex process. It involves memory, it involves loss, but it also, involves hope and renewal. And, and like I said, there's just you're talking about I think it said the temple had been destroyed in 586 BC, and the year was about to be 536 as the singing continued. So it had been 50 years in between. So basically, the older priests were in their probably in their late teens, early 20s when the temple was destroyed. And now, 50 years later, here they are. it's not, surprising. It's quite understandable. They wept bitterly. They had to be thinking of their, and it could have been this, and as it comes to this, besides just not only the, kind of gets into the reason why were they put in captivity and exile to begin with? What was their issue? What caused them to be conquered? Back in the day when Israel was put in captivity and exile, it was usually because as a nation, they were what? Yeah, they turned the wrong way. They made bad leaders or don't know. But it says here that perhaps the older priests wept bitterly. Maybe they've been thinking of the sins of the generations of the past that resulted in the destruction of the former. And that's in Haggai chapter 2, so it kind of references that. So, and it says those that were shouting for joy were undoubtedly young enough to not have seen Solomon's temple perhaps, and the excitement of this accomplishment was to them was unprecedented and thrilling. So we kind of get to that, and as time moved beyond that high emotion, you can imagine the excitement and things of that nature as it comes on. Good morning.
Good morning.
So kind of just key themes here from this, and as we kind of finish up, number one is the priority of worship. The people were, the first thing, as they returned was they wanted to restore the altar before rebuilding the temple, and they placed spiritual renewal above physical rebuilding. Number two, obedience amid. Got it. Obedience amid fear. Like I said, she put a few of those out the last couple of days. There's one up here now. So, despite fear from the surrounding enemies, they moved forward with the rebuilding process. Despite the fear from, they moved forward. Number three, it was an intergenerational experience. And I got that one because I think that's, this chapter highlights the different emotional reactions of the old and young, reminding us that both memory and vision are essential in restoration. So I think that's, that definitely is something for us here. We're going to have memories of the previous church, but we also got to have vision for the new vision or a new version as well. And then God's covenant faithfulness. And then the refrain, his steadfast love endures forever, and it reflects deep trust in God's promises despite their humble beginnings. So, like I said, Ezra chapter 3 right there is one of those, I think, for me, like I said, maybe it kind of just summarizes, hopefully, as we I guess to quote Winston Churchill, perhaps, I don't know. I think he's the one that said I think it was after Dunkirk or something, I can't remember. It's not the beginning of the end, but it was the end of the beginning, or something like that. And so we're right here, starting to be able to see, maybe we can kind of see the finish line right here, and hopefully that gives us hope. And I felt like that chapter right there can kind of, give us the comfort of, hey, we know what these people felt too, in a way. Anybody got anything else they would like to share? Or again, I kind of apologize for dominating that one, but like I did. All right, like I said, don't forget if you got any other suggestions on the book you wouldn't mind looking at, let me know. Get those ordered, hopefully get those handed out next Sunday. I'll do one more lesson, just kind of find it, and then that way we can kind of get back into organized where you can prepare and things like that. That sound good? Yeah. That leads to close all my classes. Questions, comments, snide remarks, or corny jokes?
I just like to thank the Lord for all my blessings.
Yeah. Same here. Been blessed, like I said, the Lord's, No, he's blessed me and Frida. Blessed me, I've been blessed more with her and probably the other way around, she has to put up with me, so. Alright, we'll close with a word of prayer. Lord, again, we're thankful for this day, we're thankful for all your many blessings, thankful for this time and this lesson, and Lord, as we remove, Lord, just let us, as we continue forward here, as we get closer and closer to our restoration here, Lord, just let us be reminded that it's okay to remember, and also give us the joy of the vision to look forward, Lord. Lord, as we go through our worship service, Lord, just to be with those who are not able to be here for whatever reason. Lord, we're thankful for the men and women of our country as we recognize this weekend who gave the ultimate sacrifice for our country, Lord, just for them and their families, Lord. Lord, just again, just lead, guide, and direct us to be better servants for you. And Lord, forgive us where we